Hi everyone. So today we have a very exciting topic, which is overcoming obstacles to cloud native. I'm going to just do a quick intro for myself. I'm D. Kumar. I run marketing for the Cloud Native Computing Foundation, and I'm going to let the panel members here introduce themselves.
Shall I go first?
Yeah,
Hi, I'm James Strachan. I work for CloudBees. I'm an open source geek and one of the co-founders of JenkinsX. And I love Kubernetes.
Hi, I'm Nagy Asmar. I work at Medallia, and I run the cloud services team there. So I'm VP of engineering.
Hi, my name is Cici Chirazi, and I work at Salesforce, and I'm responsible for the engineering services.
Hi, I'm Dana Lawson. I am the VP of Engineering at Envision app.
Hi, I'm Bo Chang. I'm the Senior Director of SiriusXM Connected Vehicle. I'm on the infrastructure side and managing the DevOps practice.
And lastly, Gilbert Martin. I work for Aptus. I run Senior Director of Cloud Operations. I previously also ran DevOps.
Okay. All right. So before we dive in, I think we all need to, have a common understanding of what is cloud native. So just a little bit of who we are. The Cloud Native Computing Foundation, we are an open source software foundation, and our goal is really to make cloud native universal and sustainable. And the way we do that is we essentially are the vendor neutral home for all leading companies in the world. And we work with leading industry leaders and as well as the community, which is primarily comprised of developers, contributors, maintainers. So we really take the community very seriously, and we are constantly working with them in terms of feedback. And just last year, also from a Cloud Native Computing Foundation standpoint, we publish about 3 surveys each year, and it's mainly driven by the community, so we make sure that we hear the community and look at certain questions. And then just to keep it simple from a CNCF perspective, and I think this is what we as an industry agreed, is how do you define cloud native? And I think the thinking was, let's just call it a new way or a method to deploy applications in a modern way. So it's all about new application development and deployment. And then that kind of stems a whole set of methodologies, tools, and technologies. And I'm sure all of you must have heard all different buzzwords in terms of containers, orchestration, monitoring, logging, security. And there are a number of amazing technologies that are helping serve the needs of the community. But I think it'll be great to get the panel's perspective in terms of how you guys define cloud native and what it really means to your company and the customers that you're serving. So I guess I'll have Bo kind of take the lead, and then I think it'll be great for the entire panel to give your thoughts on how you guys define cloud native.
Sure. Thank you. First of all, thank you to CloudBees for inviting me to be part of this panel. And thank you guys for sticking around and attending our session. This is the second day, and I think most people are pretty tired, but really appreciate you guys being here. So anyways, if you were at the keynote this morning, Justin Graham from AWS talked about cloud native, right? He talked about 3 primitives. They were microservices, they were container-based, and they were dynamically managed. So if you think about the early days of the cloud, the focus was on compute and storage. We moved beyond that. I think today AWS has probably over 106 or maybe even 140 different services that's available. So when we talk about cloud native, you're talking about taking advantage of those services, architecting your solution around that. That's different than being cloud enabled. So cloud enabled, in my view, is more of a forklift. So you've got servers and applications in your data center, and you're just basically moving that into AWS. So you've cloud enabled your environment, but you're not cloud native yet because you're not utilizing any of those services that were engineered in the cloud.
Yeah, doesn't matter, or we can have a certain order. But
Okay, I will jump in as Salesforce was basically born in the cloud. That's a easy one. not only the platform, the microservices, as Bo just mentioned, but also truly developing for that infrastructure that is powered by all the AWSs or GCPs or other service providers of the world to run your application and your services on.
So I agree with everything everyone's just said, by the way. But I think for me, cloud native is using the cloud well. And I think over time that changes in what it means from an implementation detail. Like a decade ago, using the cloud well was EC2, some VMs, and a bit of persistence. Now today, using the cloud well is either you're doing Kubernetes or you're doing some kind of serverless Lambda kind of thing. I think what I'm hoping happens is the Kubernetes versus serverless kind of blends together, because really there's containers there anyways, and the only real difference is more of a billing model. Like, do I get billed for managing nodes? Do I even care if there's nodes? What I love Kubernetes, by the way. I don't know if I've mentioned that. What I love about Kubernetes is one of the issues with like Amazon a decade ago is it was all completely Amazon proprietary, and Google was very different, Amazon was different, Azure was very different, which is okay, but it's horrible for developers. You've got 3 things to learn. It's horrible. What's amazing about Kubernetes is Kubernetes runs everywhere. On-premise, private cloud, public cloud. Every cloud provider supports it. Every PaaS supports it. Every operating system supports it. That's truly amazing. One of the issues with serverless is it's kind of still a bit of a hot mess. Of Lambda is kind of nothing like Google Cloud Functions and Azure Cloud Functions. So what I'm hoping as a developer, because I'm a geek, right? I'm a developer, so I look at it as a developer. What I'm hoping is I want to see serverless and Kubernetes kind of blend together, so you can look at serverless as a Kubernetes cluster if you kind of squint. And yeah, it's kind of like Kubernetes. But for example, Fargate, this year Fargate's going to be technically a Kubernetes cluster. So if you want to pretend Fargate is Kubernetes, you can crack on. And similarly with Azure container instances, it's kind of Kubernetes. Whether it's actually using Kubernetes to run the containers doesn't really matter. But in terms of packaging your app as a Docker container, making some YAML and running it, and having storage and secrets and load balancing and ingress and all of that kind of awesome stuff, for me, that's an amazing change. Like Cloud Native has been from this proprietary hot mess to this universal standard Kubernetes. And I'm hoping with Knative, for example, Knative isn't in the CNCF yet, which is a slight issue. But I'm hoping, whether it's Knative or something else, I'm hoping something like Knative comes along to blend the spectrum between serverless and Kubernetes, because really, you might want to hide the containers and say, I just want to run some JavaScript in the cloud. Whether you want to see a Docker file or not doesn't really matter. I mean, it's the same kind of stuff under the covers. But for me, yeah, I'm rambling already, I apologize. So for me, it's Kubernetes and serverless, but I want to see a closer alignment between Kubernetes and serverless. So there's one programming model, and you could be serverless, as in dynamically starting up containers, or you could be long-running containers. Because for me, that's trivial. It's a billing issue, not a technology issue. Sorry, that was quite a long answer. I'll be more brief in future. Anybody else?
Great. And I think the next follow-on question to that, which naturally fits, is what approaches are you guys taking in your own companies in terms of making certain decisions, which are really, really important? Because I think we're all very familiar with lift and shift, where we all struggle with having, monolith legacy old applications that have been there for decades. So either you can take that big blob of code and move it to the cloud, or there are certain decisions to be made. Should I refactor it, or should I just put my IT budget and pretty much scrap it and write code from scratch or create new applications? Or the other third option could be is, when do you exactly think about distributed architecture, which is essentially microservices?
So I can take that. I think that it's clear that if you're starting out and you have a clean slate, then it's clear which direction you're going to go. But for most of us, we have to support the business, and which means that we don't have the luxury of completely rewriting our cloud solution. We're a SaaS company at Medallia, and we have applications that are in the various states of maturity. So we have some things that have been around for some time, and they're sort of time tested and known to be stable, et cetera. And then we have newer parts of the solution that are more microservices based and more cloud native. And so when you think about migrating to a completely cloud native architecture, we chose to take a very hybrid approach. So we chose to migrate some services as is, some to refactor or completely rewrite, with the idea that we will eventually move towards a more decoupled architecture on those ones that are more monolithic. And so in order to do that, we also had to adapt. We deploy both in our own data centers as well on public cloud. And so we had to adapt some of our containers to be able to deal with some of the idiosyncrasies of those long-lived services. And so it's a question of what you can afford, because I favor a very pragmatic approach to this kind of question.
Much like Naji, Envision, if y'all aren't familiar, we're a design platform, and Envision started in the cloud, and the company actually is 100% distributed. So cloud native is like kind of meets with that new technology of having a team that's 100% remote, because some of the features and the things about being cloud native allow you to move without having to ask for help, having to ask for assistance. There's these things in the web and these tool sets that allow you to do things independently and asynchronously. And so just like that, there isn't a one-size-fits-all when you think about how am I going to look at my future strategic growth, what does my platform need? We had the old school monolithic application where it was one thing with maybe two backends, and then really thinking about, embracing technology, we chose to go with a microservices distributed architecture, and then using cloud native tools to be able to enable our team, no matter where in the world they're located, to be able to do and execute their job, because the information's out there. The old school thinking of DevOps, or before it was called DevOps, when I started in the 90s, it was IT. That's what it was called. It was called IT, and we were all sysadmins. But now everybody's DevOps or engineers. We're all engineers now. It's still the same. I don't care what anybody says. It was it was kind of like the Panama Canal, where you went through a series of locks. It was like, can you pass, go? And I think one of the things about thinking about what you're going to do when you go from maybe on-prem or a hybrid solution is, how can you enable people to move faster? Technology is moving so fast. There's competitors in every corner of the market. As soon as you think you got it, somebody else got it. And so by taking that risk and by taking that leap, you can start to modernize your practices. And it doesn't matter what industry you're in. You're seeing healthcare, financial embrace this, because they know to be competitive, you have to be able to release faster, right? And so I think, there's a lot of decisions that go beyond, like, do I do a hybrid model? Do I do a forklift model? And really, I think you have to progress just as technology progresses.
Yeah, so just to add to what everybody said, so we are also cloud native. We're distributed across AWS, Azure, and we were born in the cloud as well. But my previous experience at the bigger companies, they've done the forklift, they've done the lift and shift, and I think I want to add a slightly different a version of this is, you got to think about, when you do a lift and shift, what is your next step, right? So not just doing a lift and shift or a forklift, but prepare yourself for using the cloud native tools. Also, in my opinion, experience is think about using cloud native tools versus other tools that are not native to the platform. So for example, AWS, CloudWatch, or Azure OMS or Application Insights, look at those type of tool sets, because they'll integrate better with the cloud versus using third-party tools, right? Also, just to add, I think it was Dana, right? Just to add to that, just to add to her comment about IT or DevOps, right? It's just a practice. Think of DevOps as a practice, not necessarily the technology, right? It's a practice of how to do things, a process of how to do things. And again, yes, most companies want to get their software to customers' hand fast. But how do you do that, right? And there's a lot of, I guess, misconception about the cloud. It's not secure, or my data is going to get stolen, or, it's not really true. If you do it right, and I'm sure most of you can figure this out, you guys will get it there. All I would ask is reset your mindset and don't think like IT. Think about like you're going to the cloud and you don't know anything about IT. You don't know anything about what you're going into. You just got to start new and start new ways of doing and deploying things.
Cheers. So I agree with everything everyone's just said. I wanted to go back to something you said, Dana. I think the most important thing right now is everyone needs to go fast. The State of DevOps report, and Nicole speaking later today, all go to that. It's going to be amazing. But the thing that has truly shocked me, really, high-performing teams are 2,000 times faster than low-performing teams, right? Just think about that for a second. You've got another team that is literally making value 2,000 times. Like in one day, that's like a couple of years of your slow-performing team's life. I mean, that's staggering, right? And just think, if you're in a low-performing team, you've got like a year and you're out of business pretty much, right? Everything is getting pretty competitive. So that was the first thing. It's about speed. And what the cloud gives you is speed. But the other thing I was going to say, and again, echoing what everyone said, there used to be this thing, it's public cloud or no cloud. There used to be the kind of weird thing, and I can't use the public cloud because of blah, 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 regulation, blah, 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 where my data lives. Google has announced GKE on-premise. I'm sure Amazon and, well, already Azure on-premise is going to be a thing, Kubernetes on-premise, I think this year. I'm sure Amazon is going to do the same thing. They've already got the Snowflakey thing and the Lambda on-premise. Basically, the cloud can be on-premise now. So basically, everything should be cloud. Everything you do should use, well, to use Nicole's and the Accelerate book, we should all use the cloud well, which means working in a cloud-native way, wherever your stuff's running. It could be on-premise, it could be private cloud, public cloud, it could be a PaaS vendor, whatever. But use all of the tools you mentioned, like Stackdriver, CloudWatch, monitor things in a cloud way, run things elastically in a cloud way. I was talking to somebody at the conference, and they were saying, we don't like Kubernetes. And it's like, okay. So what do you do? Oh, so we like running Docker daemons on loads of machines, and we like SSH into the boxes and run Docker run. And it's like, so you've built a really crap version of Kubernetes. and you're happy with that. I mean, that was the word. It's like I felt really sorry for them. I want to give them a hug, and you will learn soon. But it's like the sad fact is they will be out of business probably in like 2 years, because it's like, you've got to get with the program. This is not some Kool-Aid we're all drinking and it's all kind of a mirage and we've all got secret Google shares that we're trying to whatever. It's doing DevOps right means going fast, and that means using the cloud correctly wherever the hell it is. But now on-premise is cloud, or should be. So we all need to go fast and use the cloud. And if Google or Amazon or Microsoft can do your logging and alerting and charting and auto management and scaling and data and whatever, use it. Like, even just doing something like a highly available database on premise, that's proper hard stuff. You could spend 5 years trying to figure out how to do that with SANs and backup policies and whatever. Or you could just say, let's just let Google do it. But let's move on. What's the next problem? So I think going fast, and let's stop thinking the cloud is only public. The cloud is now on premise. Okay.
No, I think this is great. So you guys kind of touched on some really key concepts in terms of cloud native, the definition, and the approaches. And I think we kind of talked about it, but I still want to go a little deep in terms of what is really driving all these companies to think about cloud native. So one of the things we, as in CNCF, we get the benefit is to really poll the community and really understand. And we talked to a lot of other companies, including yourselves, is what we found that was astounding is until last year, December 2017, I think in terms of education awareness, and a lot of people were trying to just do a science experiment, if you will. So they were trying Kubernetes on-prem, or they were not actually trying it with their business critical applications. It was more of something that would really not impact the revenue or top line. So, but I think based on just a recent survey that we did a couple months ago, what was found is about 200%, and we polled about 5,000 enterprise companies, and 40% of the respondents for that specific survey said that most of these companies are now deploying workloads to production. And I think the stats was pretty amazing from last year. It's about 200% in growth. And then I think a lot of other companies are now still in the evaluation phase in terms of really saying, okay, what is cloud native? How do I begin? How do I get started? And I think still there's a big jump up there in terms of 370+%. So I just wanted to get your thoughts in terms of, I think we already touched on it, is how are you guys kind of looking at, from your own perspective, what is it that is really driving you guys to think about cloud native? Is it the customers, or is it like internal processes, internal applications, business critical applications? So what exactly is prompting companies to really start thinking about cloud native, because the time is now?
Okay. So I'll just say one quick thing that is important to us, which is to be able to deploy our application and offer our services to meet the customer requirements. And a lot of customers that we have, for instance, have data residency requirements, et cetera. And so we naturally have to be able to bring our application close to where the customer is. And being cloud native allows us that flexibility, so that we develop one application and we have a deployment flexibility that allows us to be able to deploy in a country where we don't really have a presence, for example.
Can I do a quick thing and then we could go that way? Is that okay?
All right.
Is that okay? Okay. Just a really quick thing. So I just wanted to say, so one of the things me and my team have been working on all year, and the thing we're focusing on is, we think, in 5 years' time, the only companies that exist will be using Kubernetes, right? And the ones who aren't will be dead. Okay, maybe not 5 years, maybe 10 years, right? But like the cloud is, if you're not cloud native, you won't be in business much longer because of this speed difference, right? So in my view, okay, I might not be completely right, but I think most people are going to be using Kubernetes in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years, right? And if you're not, you're probably out of business. And if you're at a company that's not using Kubernetes, you should probably switch, because you're going to lose your job soon. So what we've been focused exactly. So really, just move. If your company, in fact, I would say, if your company's not even looking at moving to Kubernetes in the next year, move. Seriously, move, because that company will be displaced by a high-performing, fast company that's using the cloud well. So that's my first recommendation. Move to where the Kubernetes is. But the other thing is, from a personal thing, we've been really focusing on how do we move people to a cloud-native world? And there's quite a lot to take on. What is Kubernetes? Why would I use it? What's the cloud? Why should I use it? What does cloud-native really mean? There's a lot of kind of technology to get your head around. There's different ways of working. It's quite a lot of people facing this wall of, oh my God, where do I read the 101 of what Kubernetes is and how do I do that stuff? So with Jenkins X, we're really trying to, one of the main goals of Jenkins X is to bring Java developers, Node developers, Go developers who just know how to write code, bring them to Kubernetes. That's really the kind of point we're trying to do, is use Jenkins to move people to Kubernetes, so that if you know how to write code in some programming language, we'll move your code to Kubernetes. You can take your time figuring out what Kubernetes is. You don't need to know any of that stuff. I mean, over time, this osmosis happens, and you start going, oh, there's a thing called Stackdriver. Oh, that's kind of cool. Oh, Prometheus can do like monitoring and shit. And oh, Istio, oh my God, service meshes are cool. So you kind of gradually get infected by all the awesome of the cloud ecosystem. But the most important thing is just to move there quickly and start working there. The more we can move away from SSHing into boxes to run Docker on the command line, or making VMs and posting them to somewhere, the more you can just move to Kubernetes, the faster you will go. And the Kubernetes and the cloud native stuff will kind of just happen organically as you learn more about what you're doing, right?
Thanks for telling us how you really feel about Kubernetes.
So James, can you tell us how you feel about Kubernetes? So something to, I think a number of the panel members already mentioned that basically the reason that we are adopting the cloud so quickly is to bring more and more value to the business. Yes, speed is definitely one of them, but the other things that is the underlying value is quality, the ability to actually be very proactive in terms of continually improving, adapting new technologies, and that's, as we talked about, is a process, correct? Is a practice that by adapting the DevOps practices, we will be able to take advantage of the new shiny Kubernetes or anything else that will come up on the horizon. So again, the reason is mainly business driven, to gain that value that we can then invest back into the business and be agile enough to pivot when the business need you to pivot. So if they abandon a strategy and they want to go into a different direction, we don't have those huge infrastructures that we were just mentioning to disassemble and rebuild, but it's just a call away in terms of basically requesting the services that we need to, but then be able to develop on top of them.
Kubernetes is the boss. We all know that. I'm with you, man. I'm with you. You know, I think about just there's a lot of different factors for why companies want to adopt this approach to cloud native. A big one is about diversification of customers. You'd be hard pressed to see a major retailer be on another major retailer's cloud service. It happens. And so I think, you know, some of the power of cloud native, just like Kubernetes, allows you to abstract your compute, to abstract your resources, to bring the on-prem into the cloud, and allows you to diversify your customer base because you don't want to be on somebody else's gear that's in competition with you from business. That's a big aspect. Another one too, which is, you know, I'm going to put my executive hat on, which I'm wearing today. I know, right? This is modern. Is a lot of companies, you know, you have to, at least in the startup world, you know, you don't want to be in the hole indefinitely. You don't want to be not profitable forever. And startups are inherently unprofitable. That's what we do. We take a lot of money and we spend a lot of money. But when you think about it from a financial aspect versus your capitalization or your operational expense, you want to have that sweet margin space. Nobody likes to talk about the books. I'm going to talk about the books. The cloud is expensive, but you know what's even more expensive? Having a whole department of 30 people managing your infrastructure when there's a modern tool set out there that can do it for you. And I personally, you know, it's that struggle of build versus buy, but when you want to have that magic margin of like how much money am I going to spend on my operations, especially because you want to be profitable sometime in the century, because hopefully that goes in your workers' pockets, you do make those decisions and those trade-offs. And the reality of it is it's an easy argument to say, well, if I do a colo or on-prem solution, I'm inherently saving money because the cloud is expensive. That's not true if you think about people and your engineers that you have to maintain that. You can have a global infrastructure set with a small team that can do it in a consistent manner with today's technology if you embrace it. And you can also diversify your client base by being, you know, cloud agnostic and having technologies like Kubernetes. I mean, there was a war, at least, you know, I don't want to call it a war, but we're all engineers, of like Mesos or Kubernetes. And I do personally think Kubernetes won that battle. And, you know, to your point, James, is, you know, you're either going to adopt or not. And by doing so, you're not only going to impact the ability to move fast, which is key, but also hopefully have, you know, a smaller set of engineers to be able to manage something globally and have that consistency, right? Because it's not just about, hey, I'm going to do this thing or I'm going to do this experiment, because it was an experiment. It's really about what can I do across any kind of platform and do it in a way that is repeatable, because repeatability equals speed.
Yeah, I don't have a whole lot to add because I think everybody covered kind of the themes that I wanted to talk about. But you know, from my perspective, while cost is a factor, I think, you know, we wanted to be able to innovate. And able to do that, we have to move to the cloud. We have to be able to allow our developers to be able to do what they need to do and not have to wait on an infrastructure person to stand up a server and that lead time.
Right. So I think Solaris zones are the best. I think they're, you know, Solaris zones were the beginning of Kubernetes, in my opinion. Whoever dealt with Solaris. Anyways, yeah, I guess I don't have a lot to add here, but I do think innovation is a big one. I think the ability to give your direct reports the access to work from home, which a lot of companies are against, which I don't believe that. But the ability for an employee to work from home is awesome, especially on the cloud. You don't have to be at the office, technically. I mean, right? You know, in addition to what everybody said, margins are a huge, huge thing in my bucket. I have to meet some sort of 80% margin that this company is asking me to meet with, right? When, you know, we're spending all these cloud resources. Again, you know, diversification of the cloud. And vendor lock-in is a huge one, right? You don't want to be locked into any vendor at any given point, and then they're, you know, raise prices on you, and you're going to be like, well, how am I going to justify this, right? I think one of the last points that I wanted to make that I forgot. Well, okay. Anyways, I'm sure it'll come back to me. I'll just interrupt James next time. All right. Thank you.
it looks like you knew what I'm going to ask next, because you touched on some key points here about just in terms of practice, culture, internal processes. So the next question that I had is change management, right? That's really, really important in terms of, not only in terms of just looking at engineers, but there's this DevOps or IT in the past, in terms of bringing these teams together, looking at new ways how these teams can collaborate and work together, and making it more automated so we achieve scale. And so just wanted to get your thoughts in terms of how do you guys motivate your teams to completely think differently. And I think you touched on your point, Gilbert, in terms of making sure the teams are okay even if they're remote. But just curious to see how each one of you drive your teams towards the new ways of looking at things from a cloud native perspective.
Okay, yeah, and I remember what I was going to say now. So in the previous question, just really quick, is if you think about the evolution of IT, I guess I'd say, right? You had servers that you have to order, procure, take 30, 90, 120 days. Then you had then this AWS cloud came, and they said, hey, you don't have to do that anymore. You can just spin up the service in 5 minutes, right? And then in today's world, we're like completely spoiled. We're waiting 5 minutes, and we're like, why is it taking so long, right? And then that was my only comment. But I mean, cloud native is great. So if you guys are not on board, you guys should come on board. Okay, going back to your question. So from a processes perspective, change management, incident management, et cetera. So the way I like to look at it, or we like to look at it, is one is try to build a team where they're very cloud oriented. They have that mindset in mind, right? And that was one key factor for us. Try to build a lot of A players, but don't have that A attitude, right? Second is when you're doing change management, change management or process in change management, we have CI pipelines, right? So everything is somehow version tracked and checked, right? So a repo, developer checks and codes to the repo. The Jenkins file is there, creates the CI pipeline. That pipeline gets executed. The code runs through a certain number of steps for unit testing, security testing, static code analysis, dynamic code analysis, etc. And then you have at the end an artifact that you check in, right? So if you look at all those different steps, every single step is being documented and versioned in some repository or an artifactory, where your binary lives with a checksum, right? So think of those type of processes where you build process around those. So when an auditor comes in, you say, well, let me see all these different things. You have version history of all of your code. Right now at deployment time, you have the same exact kind of process. You have your your CD pipeline, which then you put some sort of code that will allow you to approve or deny a push to production, right? And some pushes to production can be automated, depending on how you define that process, or some pushes, you need approval and have a button to push, right? So that's where I suggest that you would get to. But I mean, think of it from a compliance and an auditor perspective. When an auditor comes into your environment, how are you gonna prove to them that this is happening?
Yeah, so I think one of the biggest challenges for us, and I think for a lot of organizations in terms of moving to the cloud, the technology is the easy part. I think it's the people and the culture that making that transformation has probably been the most challenging. We've been on the road in moving to the cloud for the last 4.5 years, and it's been really difficult. You've got people that were once working in the storage or once Linux admins. You've got to have a path and a way for them to come along with you. And I always tell people is that we don't invest in technology, but we invest in the people. And so it was very important for us to get from senior leadership down to embrace the DevOps cultures, to get people to collaborate, and get people educated and get them to really understand all the various technologies and terminology. But if you can get people behind that and change that culture, I think you'll be a lot more successful. It's not building a tool and they will come. We actually tried that and that didn't work, so we kind of had to reset. I'll be happy to. Maybe we can. I know we've got some time constraints.
Q&A after this. Yeah.
So I'm the evil leader that made all the product engineers be on call and like maintain their own stuff. I said, my team's not going to do that. My team is SMEs. We're subject matter experts. We're here to build tool sets for you to do what you need to do. And that's kind of a cloud native kind of practice is really thinking about like that analogy I said where in the times of the past where you had the Panama Canal and you had the lock system where it's like, okay, approval, approval, approval. That can all be automated. Every single bit of that can be automated. Every artifact, every change can be a part of a continuous integration and continuous delivery pipeline where you don't actually have people watching it. Because I feel like those problems have been solved. They have been solved. I mean, we were early adopters of CodeShip and people thought we were insane. They're like, you're gonna use an online build service? I was like, yeah, it's fine. But I think really, touching on what Bo said, it's about the culture. It's like defining that persona that wants to change, that wants to elevate. I think of in times of past where you had this designation of, I'm the production operations staff, I'm the developer. DevOps is a culture. You're going to build tools so that you can do your operational functions without having people be that person. Now, I still think there's like a need for expertise in that area because as much as I love making buttons, I really hate making buttons. And I'll never be a front-end dev. But I think that really what you need to find to make your mean time to recovery and your incident management and the holistic ability to maintain your scale and infrastructure is by implementing that culture. And what CloudNative has done is being able to automate those processes that used to be maybe driven by paper and turn them into tool sets. So it doesn't matter what kind of developer you are. It doesn't matter what your discipline is. You can do what you need to do with low friction. And for me, that's a huge reason that I've pushed for cloud native, and I've pushed for the culture to be opening of learning these new technologies. I don't need Kubernetes experts per se, but I need people to understand how they can get their stuff into the ecosystem. And so that's really, I think, a harder part is getting that buy-in and saying, okay, you build, own, and operate. You don't just build. And that's really what cloud native unlocks, is that ability to really own the whole story.
Yeah, if you have the luxury of actually starting from scratch, as some of us just mentioned, that's great. But most of us, even at Salesforce, we started not adopting DevOps because back then DevOps didn't exist. It was still IT, I guess. And a lot of things were very manual. And change like a project needs to be managed is not something we already talked about. Culture, we talked about the need to actually deploy a transformation team to help the organization move the needle from current state to the future state. It is not something that it happens organically, at least in big organizations. So there needs to be definite executive buy-in and participation, and definitely you need to be able to train folks and make sure that their skill and knowledge are ready to embrace cloud native. You also need, what we found extremely successful was to deploy agile coaches and basically make them be the proactive arm even after our initial transformation was completed. The coaches remain and they continue for the past 14 years to work with the team to continuously improve our practices, because as new tools come along, as new practices come along, we need to know how to scale and take advantage of them. So change, we are all human and we all resist change because we love the way we do things, and we don't like people to move our cheese. So because of that, we want to make sure that if you're embarking on a big transformation, that you actually think of it as a big initiative, as a project, and put all the resources that you put against a project against this change management.
I was just going to make a point, going back to some earlier points. If you want to get the best people, embrace remote working. I'm a long-time open source geek, and the entire world of open source is all completely remote teams, and the open source world goes crazy fast. You only have to watch for the new JavaScript frameworks happening every 5 minutes. So open source developers figured out how to go fast working remotely by using standard tools, Git, issue trackers, chat, wikis, and a CI/CD thing. That's basically all you need for a team to work well. I mean, I'm not saying that's all, but you also kind of need a good culture to embody the team together. But remote teams can be amazing, and it's an easy way to hire the best people, and often sometimes cheaper people. If you're based in the Bay Area, you can find people in other parts of the world that's maybe not quite so crazy expensive to live. So I'm a huge fan of remote teams, but the main reason I brought up the remote teams is I'm a huge fan of Git and source control, right? One of the DevOps best practices is use source control. But for change management, for me, GitOps is a term that the Weaveworks folks came up with last year or whatever. Everything, and most people have been doing this for years, right? This is not a new thing. Anybody who uses Ansible or Terraform or CloudFormations uses a Git repository. Jenkins X, we try and get you to use a Git repository for your Jenkins files. But really, all the good practices of DevOps has been Git-based, GitOps. In other words, put stuff in source control. Teams work together then in Git with pull requests, issues, you discuss changes, you code review changes. That's the way of doing change management well, where everything's audited, everything's in Git, everything's easily to roll back. When you've got a remote team, even if your team's in an office, somebody does something with kubectl apply, you have no clue what just happened. Like, why is everything, who deleted all my shit? Like, where's it gone? Like, I like the idea of, I mean, it's almost like your on-call idea. I like the idea of productions read-only to everybody, apart from Git. If you do a pull request on Git, that's how you change production. No one can do weird SSH kind of crazy stuff. Everything has to go through Git, because then you have a cultural way of doing, to your point on automation, do CI and CD for everything. How you manage your cloud infrastructure, how you manage CloudFormation, Terraform, Ansible, whatever you're doing, put everything in Git, all of your environment config, all of your infrastructure. And then you have a way of remote teams or co-located teams to work together and review things and go fast and automate the crap out of everything and go faster.
Okay, I didn't want to give him the last word here. So yeah, no. So I think it's been touched on by everybody here, but most teams include remote developers and teams that are distributed. And Git is a central collaboration infrastructure. What the genius of Git is that it took the social element and formalized it in the source code control repository. And so now you have a platform for people to collaborate effectively on engineering together, right? And that's what made it so powerful. And that's why it enabled all of these things to happen. Yeah.
I just want to make one last comment, sorry. I just wanted to rectify my comment. I believe in people, just like everybody here. Yes, I had the CloudNative start of hiring, from start. But in my previous company, we did go through a lot of transformation. I used to work for Symantec. Symantec's a 10,000 employee company. So as you can imagine, change is a huge, huge issue in a security company. And we did do a lot of, investment into our, people. And people are, for me, are, if you can have a great relationship with people, people will do the right thing. So that was it.
So this is great. So I think we kind of touched, like, from the fundamentals, we talked about the definition, then we kind of talked about the use cases, the problems, why people are adopting, or what is the drive to cloud native. But I think we need to still get back to the reason for this panel is what are the obstacles to cloud native? So one of the things, and how do we overcome those obstacles? So when we did the survey with through CNCF, couple things that you guys have already touched upon. I think it's about the main obstacles that we learned, and feel free to disagree or share your own experiences, is we learned that it's a really fast pace, and it's, a lot of new projects and technologies, and just keeping up. It just alone, Kubernetes 101, 201, like people just still are in that discovery phase, if you will. And then it's also about a lack of, a set of resources that are used to some of the old methodologies or tools. So it's about, do we now need to train the existing resources or folks in your own companies to the new ways? And then how do you bridge the gap with skill sets as well as knowledge? And then what are the other things that we can do in terms of offering certain training or certification or something that, some of these people need to go to so they can keep up with cloud native. So we're just curious in terms of how you guys are kind of bridging that gap with, the old, I wouldn't call it old school, but just with what we're all used to, and now it's all agile, fast. We talked about the benefits and being able to understand different types of clouds, just not limited to whether I'm an AWS expert or an Azure expert. But now you need to have a breadth of understanding of all the different public clouds. And then also not just that, but then also being able to work all your internal processes and, like we talked about, change management. Do you want to go first, James?
Oh, there's a microphone of it, sorry. No, I think that's a great point. I think I've been talking to a bunch of customers at the conference, and lots of it, for example, a common thing I've heard, we're using Cloud Foundry, it's really expensive, we feel trapped. And it's like, use Kubernetes then. But a lot of people go, well, I don't really know what Kubernetes is, I'm scared. There's a lot of kind of ignorance and fear and whatever. And I think because the Kubernetes ecosystem is moving so fast, I think, and for example, let's say Amazon or Google. You go to Amazon or Google's website and say, so what is Amazon Cloud? Here's 7,000 names of stuff. And you're like, oh my God, I don't even know where to start. So I think even in the CNCF, it's like there's Kubernetes, there's Prometheus, there's Istio, there's Helm, there's I mean, they're all amazing, use all of them. I mean, they're all amazing, but it's getting increasingly hard for people to go, maybe I'm ready for Kubernetes and cloud now. Where do you start? How do you dip your toe into this new cloud native way? Obviously, we're trying with Jenkins X to make that easy, but I think in the industry, we need a better way of saying, this is the kind of the 101 you need to do cloud native, right? This is the 101. Use Kubernetes. That's it, I think. Use Kubernetes and maybe Jenkins X, or something like that. But it's, like, for example, Kubernetes. A lot of people don't even understand what Kubernetes is. It's like, it runs your software, and it scales it up and down, and it does load balancing. That's it, right? That's not that hard. Most people understand what software is and how you run processes, and they understand load balancers, like do networking stuff. That's it. It does that, and it's kind of cheap compared to the equivalents. But I think as an industry, we need to bring everyone across. It's a skills thing, it's a training thing, it's a mindset thing. I think the CNCF is really helping, and I think I'd like to see the CNCF do like a training course. Like,
We already do.
Oh, okay. Well played. I'm done.
Okay. I think Dana mentioned it before, but we all operate under financial constraints, right? And so you have margins that you have to meet, and for us, the barriers are not so much resources or retraining of resources, because we are fairly, we were always a SaaS company. We are fairly not born in the cloud, but very close to it. But it is about that you're offering a solution, you're operating a business, and so how much engineering do you do on infrastructure versus doing the application itself? And so, and sort of justifying that to your CTO or your CFO every dollar that you spend on cloud infrastructure, right? And so that is more about the whether how much you support the business and deliver value to the business versus supporting what the business does, right? And be enabling that. And so you always have to balance that and make the argument that you're allowing the business to go faster by spending more money or resources on infrastructure.
I'll make a really quick point, just really fast.
Kubernetes for life.
I've totally forgotten what I was going to say. As you were.
I was just teasing. I was saying.
Go ahead, Sissy. Go.
I was just going to say, I think Sissy made a great point. It's getting executive buy-in. It's hard to start a cloud transformation, grassroots level. It's not going to happen. You're going to have a really eager engineer that's like, we should embrace the cloud. And that's not going to work. You're going to have some executive buy-in and really have to paint that picture of what it's going to get you in the end of the day, from a financial, from a speed, from a diversity of product and people situation. So there's a lot of factors, and I think the biggest hurdle is just the fear of change. We're human. We're human. It's weird. It's scary. It's fast. It's new. It hasn't been out in the wild, and that can be said of many of these disciplines. I remember 4 years ago, Docker is like, Docker. It's like, oh my gosh, it's the new JVM. It's the new Tomcat. No, okay, maybe it's not. But now you don't see a business that's not utilizing Docker, or far in between. And so I think that it's embracing change, getting executive buy-in is the biggest hurdle.
I was just going to make a quick point before about outsourcing, because it's a weird kind of thing. The State of DevOps report, Nicole's talk later today, talks about outsourcing core functions like writing your applications, testing your applications. High-performing teams do that in-house. You don't outsource the core pieces of developing software, but we do outsource functions like infrastructure and cloud, which is kind of like a weird conflict. Like outsourcing cloud and the management of cloud infrastructure is something we all should do. We should not outsource developing applications. If you want to be relevant and stay here, we should be building and testing and designing and implementing our own applications, but outsource all of the infrastructure and use the cloud native approach is use Datadog or Sentry or Stackdriver, or all these services that help you run your stuff. But for core software development, that should be in-house if you want to go faster.
So one more thing I wanted to add is what enables people to actually embrace this cloud native is also cost. One of the philosophies of, fail fast, it becomes really affordable. You can actually fail fast without costing your company an arm and a leg. That was one of the arguments I used in my previous company to move us from traditional to DevOps to cloud. It was, let's try it. It doesn't cost much, but we know it adds up really quickly on AWS, but that's a different topic. So it is, you have to find some way to understand the fear that the organization has. And once you understand the fear, then you can use the data to really justify why it makes sense to move.
Yeah, so I agree with everyone here. I think I'll take it from two approaches. At Apttus, we were cloud native, so it was a business decision and a driver for us to expand to the cloud or be distributed. At Symantec, when I was at Symantec was a traditional IT company, and it took a lot of effort for them to just try to jump into the cloud, right? And I'm talking from an IT-centric organization, not from a SaaS product organization. So it's two different worlds when you're dealing with an IT as a service to help the business and on a daily basis versus a SaaS organization where you're definitely margin-based and financial-based, right? You have to meet numbers, and costs of the cloud is definitely up there. I think it's probably the second highest cost of a company from a financial perspective. So I guess from an IT perspective, tell the story, right? Figure out what applications are optimal for the cloud, right? If you're in a traditional mindset, what applications are more lift and shift, and what applications are absolutely not a fit for the cloud, right? From an SaaS operations, it's all about margins. How are you gonna, make sure that you're efficient on cost running cloud, right? I think that's about it.
So I guess in a nutshell, so we all seem to agree that cloud native results in positive outcomes, and it literally touches all aspects of your software lifecycle, all the way from creation to processes to change management, etc. So if I just wanted to have a couple minutes with the audience here to see if you guys have any questions, and we can pass the mic around.
Hi, everyone. Scott Fulton from the New Stack. I've heard here on the panel today, and I've also heard elsewhere in the conference, one of the benefits of cloud native being essentially getting rid of the infrastructure people. Like we said, you're doing with 30 30 less people, boy, you're saving your organization a crap ton of money. So I'm wondering if that isn't an obstacle that we haven't really touched on in this obstacle to cloud native, because it seems like we have two options here. One of which is to pass out a whole lot of automated pink slips, and we can automate that process and make it very, very fast and Knative. Or we can adapt our corporate culture. We can change the way we talk about the way we think about the way we do things, and we can kind of sync the up with people's theme song and hope that the people we're firing will be relocated to a new area of the organization where they'll be happy with being paid less. Is there a third option I'm not seeing here?
Great question, by the way. And we struggle with that with some people sometimes. For me, I think the question isn't how do we sack people. The question is how do we deliver business value faster? If that means we can outsource our level 1 ops of running software processes and doing load balancing, people shouldn't do that anymore. That's not a task for operations teams. The task for operations teams is how can we keep continually improving how we build applications so they're easier to manage and monitor, and it's easier for developers to build reliable code and fail fast and to deliver business value better. So it's not that you don't need operations, it's that they become more SRE type roles, helping to develop the software in a way that makes it more manageable, quicker to start up, easier to diagnose, better diagnostics, and automate more and more of your CI and CD process so that it moves from source code to production fast with more and more quality baked in so you never make mistakes, or rarely make mistakes.
So let me just add to that, because I think you touched on a very good point. One of the things I do want to say is if you're in a leadership role, you don't make an announcement that you're moving to the cloud. You have conversations about that with the folks, especially the folks in the infrastructure. And what we told them is that these are opportunities for them to grow and learn and adapt to the new way of doing things. You know, I put kind of people in kind of 3 different buckets. You've got the one that's always championing new technology, the one that's always reading ahead. You've got the innocent bystander who kind of just looks around and waits to see what happens. Those people you can educate and pull in. And then you've got the third, who are the most difficult and challenging. They're always the resistant. They do not want to, change. They want to be a storage admin. They want to die a storage admin, and there's nothing that you can do about it. But I think you can really provide a lot of opportunities for people when you're moving to the cloud, and that's what we tried to do.
I just want to touch on that. I think that, that's tough, right? I mean, it's not just the tech industry that's giving away to automation. It's every industry. I think as leaders, it's our opportunity to change the book and allow people to learn new skills. Nobody wants to do something that's already been done. I think a lot of engineers are innovative. I think they're curious. The traits that I look for, and we're builders, we're makers, we're troubleshooters. Why don't you give them the opportunity to learn new skills? And I think as leaders, that's our job. It's not to hold on to the old. There are the resistors, but my challenge is tell the resistors to progress. I think that, life isn't stagnant, and neither should humans. Now, you can get into that comfortable place, but I think that becomes a personal choice. And it's I think what Bo said, it's our job to give opportunity. It doesn't mean that people will embrace it, but you have to give that opportunity. And the opportunity has to be to embrace modern technology, because it's gonna happen. We're not stopping it. You can't stop it. It's not gonna happen.
Other questions?
Thanks.